I work in a hospital that's run by the Sisters of a Catholic convent. This hospital is pretty old, set almost in the early 1910s. Needless to say, quite a few buildings on the campus are ancient and eerie. No feet. I had night duty a few days back, and since there weren't any patients to attend to, I went to sleep in the room assigned to me in the emergency room itself. A few minutes in, I felt extremely cold. It was the peak of summer and this coolness just didn't feel right. I got up, switched on the lights, and went out calling the nursing staff. I told them I didn't feel comfortable sleeping in there tonight. They were more than happy to entertain me for the rest of the evening. One of the staff is a dear friend, and she asked if I wanted to hear a ghost story. I jumped in because now we were a crowd and there was no reason to be afraid. She told me about this incident in the baby ward. It was the middle of the night. A mother walked up to the nurse's station requesting for a bowl to feed her child. One of the nurses noted down the details, mother's and baby's name, and handed over the bowl. A few seconds later, the same nurse happened to look back and saw that the woman had no feet and was floating away in the air. She pointed to the other sister as well. After recovering from what they had seen, the nurse fired up the system to check the patient's name, and to their surprise, the discharge summary by the baby and mother's name showed up. The mother had died of postpartum hemorrhage after delivering a premature baby, and the baby too had passed away a few days later due to some neonatal infection. C floor. This floor consists of private wards and is pretty posh. There's a call switch for each word which the patient rings in case they need something, and the bell sounds in the nurse's station. One of my usual nightly duties, I was typing a discharge summary when the bell to Ward 7 rang. The nurses were on break and seemed to not hear it. My senior asked me to go check on it in case it was our patient. I got up and walked through the dark corridor in search of room 7, which was at the end of the hallway. The lights were off, and it seemed like whoever was inside was sleeping. I knocked, but nobody responded. A strange sense of fear crept through me. I ran. I reached the nurse's station. My senior looked up to see me breathing heavily. He asked if I was all right. I told him that the room was dark, and that no one opened the door when I knocked. The nurses walked in at the same time and told me that there was no one admitted in Ward 7 and that the bell often rang like that. They wouldn't react unless someone was admitted. SICU bed number 1. The curious case about this bed is that no matter who ends up on it, eventually dies, no matter how young or healthy that the patient is. The incidents have been pretty unnatural over the past few months, and there's no scientific explanation. Just a few days back, a 22-year-old boy was admitted for gallbladder surgery, was shifted to SICU after surgery, and a few hours after shifting, he developed breathlessness and died before intubation. Doctors usually do not like their patients to be assigned to this bed. Even if the SICU is full, as soon as a bed vacates, a patient from number 1 immediately gets assigned a number 2 bed. There's no backstory about this. At least, not that I'm aware of. I want to start this off by saying that I only talk about this because it's part of my healing process and helps me to deal with the trauma of losing my infant son. In 2007, I was 9 months pregnant with my last child. I had had preeclampsia with previous pregnancies and a placenta abruption with a pregnancy 7 years prior, so I was being monitored very closely. Not as closely as I should have been, but that's another story for another time. The evening of December 12th, I became ill. I felt dreadful, and looked at my abdomen and thought that it looked rigid and strange. Instantly, I knew that I was dying. I can't explain it, but simultaneously I heard a whisper in my left ear, a soft, gentle whisper that said, "The baby has died." I instantly thought I was losing my mind, and yelled at my son to call 911. We were in the middle of a winter storm, so our phones were dead. I finally got a neighbor to call my husband, who took me to the maternity ward of a large hospital. One of the most experienced nurses happened to be on duty, thank goodness, because I coded when I got to the floor. I'd had a 3rd-degree abruption. 4th degree is death. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital and had to go on dialysis for a while. My ammonia levels were high, so for quite a bit I thought that I had given birth. I did get to hold him. He was beautiful, with dark curls. When I got to the medical surgery floor, I was coherent and trying to come to grips about why this had happened to me. One night, I had awoken to voices. I thought it was my family in my room. My eyes were closed, but I was awake and heard what sounded like 20 people talking to me. I was lying there, trying to understand what they were saying about me, but all the people were talking so fast and in a hushed tone. I opened my eyes to find no one there. Not one soul. What scared me was that as I opened my eyes, one person said, "Shh." A second person said, "Shh." Then there was a collective shh. I was terrified, in a dark room with the door shut, and I had a hard time moving around because of my emergency C-section incision. I started calling for my husband. He didn't answer. He would often sleep on the floor, beside my bed on a pull-out sofa chair. Suddenly, a small olive-toned girl of 6 or 7 appeared beside my bed. She had 2 curly ponytails, and was dressed in 1970s-type clothing. I could not see her eyes, just dark shadows. She pointed to the other side of my bed and said, "He's over there." My husband had been on the left side of my hospital bed and was asleep. I turned back to face her, and she was gone. Having that experience in the hospital helped change my insight about death. I know that I will see my infant son again one day. I also think that the people's voices I heard may have been people that had passed away at that hospital, as well as the little girl. I felt no threat at all, but was frightened because this was so unexpected. I was working at this hospital called Warren General in Warren, Pennsylvania, about 90 minutes east of Erie, Pennsylvania. I worked night shift. I'm a travel RN, so this was one of the hospitals that I traveled to. One night my floor was slow, so I got pulled down to the CCU to work. Well, that night my patient rang her call bell at 3 o'clock in the morning and she asked me, "What does she want?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "The nurse keeps coming in here and standing there in that corner," and she points to the corner behind the door. So I was like, "Who, Ashley?" That was the nurse I was working with, and I pointed to her because she was sitting at the nurse's station on the computer, and the woman says, "No, the other one." Well, there was no other one. It was just us two. And FYI, the patient was a woman in her 50s and didn't have any history of mental illness and was not taking any meds that would make her hallucinate. I kind of laughed, and I was like, "It's just us." And she just stares at me, so I say, "Okay, if she does it again, just yell for me and I'll come right in." Her room was 8 feet in front of the nurse station. About half an hour goes by, and she yells, "See, there you go again." I got up, started walking. I hear the bathroom door shut. It had been cracked open just a little bit to give her dark room a little light. I walk in and I say, "See, you're dreaming. There's no one else in here." She says, "No, she went in the bathroom." I open the door and the lights are still on, but no one is in there. Looking confused, I say, "What does she look like?" because I thought that someone was messing around. It's too dark to tell. I can tell it's a woman, but she's so dark that I can't really make her face out. When she says that, I get a little weirded out. But the night ends and I forget about it. 3 months go by. I get pulled back down to the same unit. I have the same room as before. This time a man in his early 60s in the patient room. Nice guy, alert and oriented and very polite. Night is going good. It's about 3 a.m. and his call light goes off, which means he needs something. So I walk in and he says to me, "You are my nurse, right?" And I nod my head. And he says, "Well, why does that lady keep coming in here and standing in that corner? What is she doing?" What? I almost crapped my pants instantly. This was 3 months later. Same room, same thing. I said to him, "Honestly, I think it's a ghost, sir." And he laughs, and I say, "You're not the first person to say that." I started telling everyone about it, and then I find out that the entire second floor has a nurse that's seen every once in a while. I guess in the 1990s, a nurse who worked there committed suicide. She shot herself to death in the second floor bathroom. A couple of years ago, I worked at a hospital as security, and part of security duties for the second shift was to lock all doors downstairs in the basement of the hospital. The type of things down there ranged from offices, supply rooms, bathrooms, and the morgue. We would also have to check the refrigeration temp inside the morgue to make sure it was running properly, but that's not important. So one night I go down to the basement, which is basically a big rectangle, locked all the doors, and just as I was going to make a right to take the stairs up, I noticed someone walk out of the corner in what looked like blue scrubs. They took about 5 steps into one of the doors I had locked. They didn't open the door or anything, just walked right through. As security, I couldn't just brush it off because recently we had people steal from the supply room, so I had to check it out, especially since it was after hours. As I walked up to the door, I immediately got goosebumps because this specific door was 1. An automatic locking door that can only be accessed by ID clearance, and 2, I didn't see the individual pull out an ID, which you have to get in. You pull out the ID, scan, and wait for the green light to pop up to open the door. I literally just saw someone take about 5 steps into the door like it was open wide, which it wasn't. The door automatically locks and closes itself. I think to myself, well, if someone accessed the door after hours, they aren't allowed to, so this might be the person that's stealing stuff. If a nurse or someone needs to go to the supply room, they call security, and security escorts them because of stealing incidents. So I pull out my ID, scan it, and open the door. I walked in and saw nobody. Then I opened all the closet doors to confirm that nobody was hiding, and then immediately got the F out, because I was 100% sure that I had just seen a ghost. Later that night, I got a call from the ER department to escort a nurse down to the supply room. When I escorted her down there, into the supply room and told her what I had seen, she shuffled through some boxes in the supply room and pulled out the same exact blue scrubs that I had seen the ghost wearing. Except they weren't scrubs. They were the blue gowns that patients wear inside the hospital. So what I had actually seen that night was a patient's ghost walking around the basement. After this experience, I definitely believe in ghosts and the afterlife. To this day, I kick myself for not looking at the cameras that night. Setting: hospital, medical surgery floor. Profession: staff nurse. This happened yesterday, and I have 2 nursing students as living proof. We basically carry those indestructible Nokia cell phones around at work. If you hit the call bell, they ring to the aide's phone first, then it bounces to my phone. Yesterday, a call bell came in from an all-female room. My phone put itself on speakerphone and answered itself. A male voice repeated on a loop with a 4 to 5 second delay, "Are you there?" At the time, I was giving a report to 2 nursing students, 1 male, 1 female. The incident happened after we had just started talking about near-death experiences. We all went white and got goosebumps. The female student said, "Well, you're haunted." It was unbelievable. The male student calmly said, "Yes, we are here." This had never happened before. Those phones don't repeat. Absolutely amazing. I went into the room later and opened the window and told him he was dead and that he needed to move on. What an experience for the students. This has never happened to me before, but I hope it happens again, and that I have the courage to do what the male student did. So I'm a week out of the hospital after spending 2 weeks in there with COVID-19 and pneumonia. I have a lot of serious health issues, and barely survived my stay, but at the end of my stay, I was woken up at about 4 a.m. by the nurse coming in to give me more antibiotics and change my fluid drip. She left to get a new tube for the drip, and whilst she did that, I rolled over in my bed and saw an elderly man standing at the end of my bed with his hand on the bed at the bottom, as he was looking out the window. Initially, I thought it was one of the elderly gents on the same ward, wandering into my room again. It had happened multiple times, as they all had dementia or delirium, so I spoke to him and asked him if he was all right, but he didn't respond. I buzzed for the nurse and she came back in a rush, and the man vanished before my eyes, and I believe before the nurse's too, as she stopped and stared for a moment, before shaking her head and continuing. I tried asking about it, but she kept telling me that I must be dreaming. Every time she came back into my room, she looked at the same spot where he had been. I'm not sure what I actually did see that night, and I didn't recognize the man at all. Back in the early 2000s when I was a kid, there was a deserted section of the local hospital waiting to be torn down and rebuilt. My friends and I thought that it would be a fantastic idea to climb onto the roof and practice our parkour skills. After about 30 minutes, one of my friends stood on a skylight and it gave out from under him. He only just managed to grab onto the ledge, which stopped him from falling in. Myself and my other friend then rushed over and grabbed his hands to start pulling him up when we noticed a little girl standing on a chair directly in the moonlight, looking up and waving. We pulled our friend to safety and quickly looked back over the side to find that the little girl was gone and the chair was on its side. We all left pretty quickly after that. All of us were shocked. We later discovered that that part of the hospital was used to treat burn victims, and a 6-year-old girl had once died there. I am a security officer and I work in a low-volume hospital. I'm sitting in my office on the computer, and to the left of me is a closet door about 3 feet away. It's a small office. Out of nowhere, there are 2 very loud pounding sounds coming from inside the closet. These were full-on banging sounds, not just knocks. It shook the entire office, it was so violent. I jumped what felt like 10 feet out of my chair. It took me a minute to realize what had just happened before I actually looked inside. Of course, nothing was in there, just some old office equipment. I'm kind of in shock now. I've worked here for a year and have had some odd stuff happen, but I could always find an explanation in my head. This time, I just can't. We've had reports of odd things happening from the housekeeping and other workers. I woke up in bed, and next to me I could see a man lying there with no distinctive facial features except for brown, darkish hair. He got up and moved to the side of my hospital bed and sat in front of me. He said to me, "You're going to die soon." I asked when, but he didn't respond, and I got up and locked myself in the bathroom. I've still never figured out what they meant or who they were. I wasn't on any medication that would bring on any hallucinations or anything like this, but this has not happened before or since. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed these true scary stories, and if you did, make sure to hit those like and subscribe buttons for me along with that notification bell to stay updated on all the latest content. To have your own horror story featured, feel free to submit it to me via the email included below in the description. Also down there you can find the links to other playlists with lots more awesome creepy content for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Until then, don't forget to embrace the terror.